So one of the last things we want to do with the BrainVoyager Getting Started tutorials is look at analysis in surface space. So this is doing surface reconstruction of the head, segmentation of white matter and grey matter. This allows us to create a mesh of the cortex. We can then inflate this mesh of the cortex and overlay statistical maps on top of it. So the first thing we want to do is open our TAL file, and on the right hand side of BrainVoyager we've got a number of buttons we've not looked at yet. So the first one of these is Create Mesh. And what this does is it opens a new window with this big giant orange sphere in it. And with the left mouse button you can rotate it around its axis. With the right mouse button you can move it around the screen, and with both at the same time you can zoom in and out. The second button is Morph Mesh. If we click on this, it will shrink the sphere around the reconstruction of the head. There it goes. We've got something that looks like this. What we can do is then start looking at different types of cut. So here we have a transverse cut, our sagittal cut, and we can also look at both hemispheres, and our coronal cut. And you can play around with this until you get used to it. So we want to save this mesh so we don't have to create it again. We can just call it CH head. We can overwrite that, close it down. Next thing we want to do is we want to create a reconstruction of the cortex so we can start overlaying statistical maps. So to do this we need to go into 3D volume tools, segmentation. Now typically for subjects we would want to define the white matter ourselves. It's a manual process, it's quite laborious, it takes a lot of time. It involves using this boundary box to pick out small regions of cortex at a time and then define them as white matter and then progress on to the next cube of cortex and the next and the next and so on. For the BrainVoyager tutorial, they've picked a subject which has really good white matter, grey matter segmentation. So for this you can just click on automatic segmentation, click on remove bridges for the left and right hemisphere, and also create surfaces of outer grey matter peel boundary, and click go. And this will take a few minutes. And you can see that it's defining the ventricles, and it brings up this window. So the graph on the left, this is your intensity histograms of your what should be your grey matter peak and your white matter peak. And between the two peaks at this local minima, you define a point which separates grey matter from white matter for BrainVoyager to pick out one from the other. It's not done a very good job, so we'll just accept the default as being between these two peaks here. This graph on the right, typically if you have good segmentation, you should see it almost like a box plot where it goes up, transverses along the graph, and then is down again. But all these little dips are indications that your segmentation isn't great. But we'll continue for now and see what BrainVoyager gives us. So BrainVoyager is finished with our cortex reconstruction. We can see the results of this. If we close all our windows, we can go into Mesh, Load Mesh, and it's creating a number of files with grey matter, white matter, right hemisphere, left hemisphere labels. The ones we want to look at are rhicosm. So let's take the left hemisphere rhicosm as an example. We can open that, and this is it here. You can see right away it's not a great reconstruction, it looks a bit knobbly. It could do with some better segmentation. But for the purposes of this tutorial, it's not too bad. So we have our reconstructed cortex here. What we can do is we can go back into meshes and go into mesh morphing, and we can tell it to inflate that cortex. Again, this will take a minute. Once inflation is done, we can use the mouse controls to get a better picture of our hemisphere. You can see there's lots of holes and points where segmentation hasn't been great, but we'll use it for now. We can go back into meshes and we can click on background and curvature colors, and we can apply some curvature and then maybe smooth it a few times. And for all these options you can go in and change the colors, but default is grey. So now we want to overlay some statistical maps onto our inflated cortex. So we can go into our TAL file and we can press Ctrl K and it'll open up our Blink3D volume time course window. We can browse to our VTC, we can attach it and close it, that's fine. Then we can go into analysis and click on general linear model single study. Define our predictors like before. They're all fine. Click go. This will compute our GLM. Now what we can do is we can go back to our inflated mesh, press Ctrl E. Here we have our surface map for our background, but we can create a new surface map. Click OK, and this will create a surface map from our GLM we just created. So that's it overlaid on our inflated cortex. We can adjust the statistical threshold. We can put it all the way up, all the way down. We can close that for now. We can spin it around. So that concludes the tutorial on analysis and surface space.